Today at the National Press Club, businessman and philanthropist Andrew Forrest. The mining magnate and chairman of Fortescue Metals Group is now a firm advocate of green hydrogen and stronger action on climate change. Andrew Forrest with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club Westpac address. I'm Jane Norman, a club director and ABC political journalist. Because of continuing lockdowns in Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, I'm welcoming you from the ABC studios in Canberra. And our guest today is Fortescue Metals Group Chairman and Founder Andrew Forrest. The title of his address is Green Hydrogen, the Power of Now. The iron ore magnate is staking his claim in the new hydrogen era, investing big in projects along the East Coast, which he says could transform Australia into an energy superpower. Andrew Forrest, welcome to the virtual National Press Club.
That's right. That change happens in two ways, gradually, then suddenly. You only had to pick up a newspaper this week to know that fossil fuels' Berlin Wall had finally and quite suddenly collapsed. The change is now, and it's sudden. The only question is, will Australia be part of it in time to be competitive? Major new green hydrogen projects, politicians sensing the massive change in the wind, old media becoming new, feels like gale force winds to me, with those winds of change driven by you. Only this morning, the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor said, no matter the opinion of critics, the move to net zero is going to happen. And if they don't, the risk to local businesses will only continue to grow. All of us are now reading the signs, and the science know this. On Saturday, I announced the $1 billion build of the world's largest green hydrogen electrolyser facility manufacturing plant here in Australia, which will double the world's supply of electrolysers. Not in India, not in China, not in Europe, but in Gladstone, Queensland, Australia. The starter gun has been fired on the journey of bringing manufacturing at home roaring back, particularly to regional Australia. Up to this point, practically all our green energy, think wind turbines, think solar panels, have, like our diesel and like our oil, been imported. But I want countries, including most of all, ours, to take control of their own economic and energy sovereignty. On top of that great state of Queensland, where Fortescue Future Industries, or FFI, is making our first major manufacturing investment, New South Wales is also to receive the world's first green hydrogen energy import and export terminal, as well as a dual-fuel power station, which will transition from a blend of green hydrogen and LNG to 100% green hydrogen as soon as GH2 supply increases. All from, I hope, after Premier Perrottet's announcement yesterday, from right here at home in New South Wales. Not from the Middle East, not from imported oil and diesel, not even pollution-ridden coal, but from crystal clean green hydrogen made right here at home. And let's clear that up, green hydrogen. We hear a lot about so-called clean hydrogen. It's a soundbite covering the fact it's made from carbon-emitting fossil fuel. It has carbon all through its supply chain. Sure, it's clean once it's hydrogen, but to get it there, it's dirty, very dirty, with heaps of carbon dioxide emitted in the process. But there is that other dirty little secret, the gas which is invisible to the naked eye, but at least 80 times more dangerous as a global warming agent than even carbon dioxide. Methane, the basis of natural gas, which is not adequately nor independently measured as fugitive emissions in fossil fuel. This sector is better off simply burning the coal, burning the oil, burning the gas than they are in hiding the emissions through turning it into blue-grey hydrogen and having our otherwise astute Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, misled into selling it as clean. Think clean coal. Think clean hydrogen. Think cancer-free tobacco. It all adds up to the same thing. Misleading sound bites put out by industries wishing to continue a duplicitous social licence to operate. And Australia has thousands of times more renewable energy than fossil fuel has reserves. So let's keep fossil fuel going, but only as long as we need to. And let's do everything we need to switch to a green future. Green electricity, green ammonia and green hydrogen can cover 100% of the world's carbon emissions. Let's not hide the fact it isn't clean. Let's not cover our tracks that we're not encouraging green hydrogen fast enough. Let's not put up walls between us and a green future. Let's just tell the truth. We'll burn carbon as long as we have to until we can get green energy into place to replace it. That's the truth. Sydney may well be known as the Emerald City, but our plan is to join New South Wales Treasurer Matt Keane and the New South Wales State Government in making Sydney the world's first major green city, the Green Emerald City, through green hydrogen. Once we're firing our own green hydrogen powered station into Sydney, our plan is to continue increasing green hydrogen production. This will be through a multi-billion-dollar investment to create 1 million tonnes of no longer imports, but green hydrogen exports from that old fossil fuel and high unemployment, but going to new future, to a new high employment future at Port Kembla in New South Wales. Further, to help build this and keep jobs in Australia, we're planning additional manufacturing centres beyond Gladstone for green industry components in Parkes, New South Wales, and again, of course, in Port Kembla. Australia can become a global green future manufacturing centre and energy superpower if we follow what the state government is doing here in New South Wales with federal policy settings. Only yesterday, New South Wales introduced the most far-reaching green hydrogen strategy in Australia with a $3 billion investment to kickstart a globally competitive local green hydrogen industry. But don't read just investment. Read what really matters. Jobs, jobs and more jobs, equaling economic prosperity as permanent in tenancy on planet Earth as humans. Again, provided we get our global warming settings right, we will not go down with the fossil fuel sun if we get those settings right. The increasingly rare, fear-mongering politicians thinking they might lose their careers by dragging yours down with them are thankfully in sharp decline. You know, WA can get a bit of undeserved flack by you unruly mob over here in the east. But a poll out only today, this is what I'm talking about, sudden, from our good friends at the West, shows that 80% of West Australians support net zero emissions by 2050. 80%. In a country where you can't even get people to agree if vaccinations work. 80% is huge. My message to us all is that Aussies, our people, our families, our workers, they get it. Even when interest rates turn around and go up, I also see a future of much cheaper home mortgages, home loans, and greater affordability for a higher standard of living because the world wants to invest in Australia. I see affordability increasing. I see affordability to light up your homes and highways, power our factories and farms, our schools, tech schools and universities all over Australia. And I see it all being done while growing our economy and while leaving your environment green and kind for your kids and grandkids. This is hard-edged economic choice, but it's also social and environmental rationalism. To the increasingly rare, thankfully, hysterical politician fear-mongering against choice, pretending to represent us, I just want to remind you, it's taken 50 years for fossil fuel to get the power bills down, and mate, they're still going up. In 5 years, not 50, you've seen the cost of green hydrogen halve. And mate, that cost is still going down. Oh, and by the way, as the gas price goes up, green hydrogen is quickly becoming cheaper than blue-grey fossil fuel, even if that fossil fuel hydrogen is dirty. Because what we're trying to do as fossil fuels, not the best mate like you, where you're clinging to the foreign oil and gas companies, playing cards with the future of every Australian, thankfully, you're becoming increasingly rare and isolated. You are denying Australia's choice. Every Australian has the choice of a dirty fuel or a clean fuel, an expensive fuel or a better fuel. Rare, hysterical politicians trying to scare us all, don't do that. Open the future to every Australian. Give us the choice. A fuel that you can make right here in Australia, clean as the day is long and made by hard-working locals, not by foreign companies controlling our standard of living at their whim, thanks to your fear. I've heard your rallying cries of deception, that Australia's sold out its economic and energy sovereignty, but it's you, the occasional now laggard politician, standing on the hose, stopping us from getting our own economic and energy sovereignty back with our own homemade green hydrogen. And as you've probably worked out by now, that's only going to happen if we produce the energy here cheaper than anywhere else. Those declining power bills are and will continue to be driven by hundreds of thousands of new jobs using the exact skills we already have in the oil, gas and coal sectors. And these sectors are declining because, at the end of the day, we're harnessing Australian wind and Australian sunshine, both with a marginal cost of zero. And nothing's less expensive than that. Moving on from these increasingly, thankfully, lonely politicians, I see the workers' careers from the fossil fuel sector to be as green and as permanent as your children's futures, and even brighter, but unlike ours, even cleaner. And I ask every Australian to dismiss those who are willfully blind to that certain future. There are none so blind as those that will not see. Most of these massive job creation sites that I've talked about will be in the bush. But let me talk to you about the first one in the city. This week I announced plans to convert one of Australia's largest fossil fuel ammonia factories in Brisbane to run on green hydrogen. It produces exactly the same molecules, but there's no carbon and much worse methane in its production. This will be a breakthrough, creating Australia's first green fertilisers and bringing down their cost for our hard-working farmers. That ammonia will also provide renewable, pollution-free energy to the ships which pass the port of Brisbane or Sydney every hour. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. What you're seeing here is economic and energy independent sovereignty being brought right back to Australia. Our green hydrogen, our green ammonia and our green fertilisers will not be determined by what Saudi Arabia or Russia, in a good mood or not, might cosily collude what the price might be, which impacts currently the lifestyle of every Australian. Let's bring our sovereignty home. Let's not stand in the road of that. This is Australia for Australia. We're making our own energy down the road with jobs next door, not overseas. Please think of that when you see a hysterical Chicken Little politician on Carl and Ali's Today Show clucking about energy security and doing absolutely nothing about it. Which brings me to someone who doesn't claim the sky is falling and whose eyes are firmly set on the future of seeing her career and 400 of her colleagues prosper at that ammonia plant I spoke of in Brisbane. Christy Rossi, Incitec Pivot's Young Facilities Supervisor. On Monday, we walked together through that plant and Christy explained that green hydrogen as the new feed to this old fossil fuel plant had not only given the entire workforce a lift in morale, but removed the dark clouds of career uncertainty, which is faced by all those now in the fossil fuel sector. From Christy Rossi to Rupert Murdoch, we can all read the writing on the wall. Following on the heels of our major announcements this week, News Corp, for so long with a questionable attitude to climate change, launched an aggressive campaign for net zero emissions. They call it Mission Zero. There was a 16-page wraparound and front-page splashes on all of its Australian mastheads, which featured the very same miners, like me, and very same farmers, like me, but we're not standing on the hose. We're calling for carbon-neutral, renewable, exciting new futures for our kids, for us, for our country. I welcome all the great journalists from News Corp and Rupert and Lachlan. We're delighted and very relieved that you've joined the fray. Your arrival, ladies and gentlemen, is just in time. The major battles of greenwashing, threats, and deeply wrong and obviously unsubstantiated claims from the fossil fuel sector are still in front of us. The ambushes are ahead and we must be ready for them. But News Corp wasn't the only change in the wind this week. Members of the National Party also called for multi-billion-dollar green investment in regional Australia. Oh, absolutely, we're going to do that. But them calling for it was unthinkable only days ago. So I'm delighted that all states and territories in Australia have a net zero target, every one of us, every state, every territory, by 2050. But Australia as a nation still does not. And that, for me, is an enormous concern. Today, if I only have one message, it's that a national target of carbon neutrality is regional Australia's jobs and economic opportunity, but only if Australians trust the good politicians not holding them back and move. And what's so important about moving now? Simply that we rely right now on other countries to buy our goods, to buy our services and finance our huge projects that are the very basis that we have the high standard of living that we enjoy. But they do it on the quid pro quo, that we meet international standards. Fair enough. Fair cop. Our global customers and financiers have a choice, just like us. And they'll make that choice in only 2 weeks' time at COP26 Glasgow. If we miss declaring carbon neutrality at COP26, we'll eventually be forced to make it anyway, just as the Reserve Bank observed today. But by then, our markets and our financings will dry up. And the stain that leaves, that we simply didn't care, that we ignored our youth, we got the politicians we deserved, will count against us forever. And that's not fear-mongering. We are, as Fortescue and other big companies, are watching international investors pulling the pin on Australian projects now. Can you blame them? They want a world which doesn't cook. It's no conspiracy, mate. They're just fund managers trying to make a dollar for their own punters. They've made a rational economic judgment that those countries with a COP26 carbon neutral commitment are much better investments than those without it. As an economic rationalist, I can see their logic. But so does half the world's investable capital, controlling $120 trillion worth of assets. They have committed to not finance companies and governments like ours without a 2050 carbon neutrality target. But let's go back to regional Australia. It got cracking on the wool boom. Dad remembers it really well. As you all know, Australia rode to success on the sheep's back, but polyester and plastic ended that boom. And so being a lad from pastoral WA, I know a little something in the mining industry about booms. But this is the best boom we'll ever have, as there will be no bust. Renewable energy will never end. Regional Australia could become one of the big players that will be the biggest industry in the world, one that is predicted to grow at a rate of US $2.5 trillion per year. There's not an industry in the world that will ever match that. That Australia, that regional Australia, can be our industry. So I say to all workers in fossil fuel industries, it doesn't matter what your skills are. Whatever they are, the new era of a green future needs your skills. And I say to all small investors and all in small business across Australia, you who really drive our economy and you who really drive our employment, the renewable future is for you. It will be working and working through you that we bring our economic and energy sovereignty back to our country. Imagine for a moment just one idea being considered by ourselves in Macquarie Bank. Instead of just driving past BP, Shell and Mobil stations on our highways, we could become a self-sufficient nation of entrepreneurs who make, not import, the fuel that fills your car or the Lynn Fox passing truck. Imagine filling up at your mate Greg's place in Tamworth, or Steve's place in Kalgoorlie, or Julie's place in Gladstone, or any other regional town where they make green hydrogen right there at the station next to the highway from wind and sunshine around the corner using Australian manufactured components. Now compare that to what we currently do, which is import over 90% of our fuel from the Middle East, Asia and Africa with imported products, leaving our energy security and our standard of living in their hands. Australians deserve economic choices and to bring our energy and economic sovereignty back home. Committing to carbon neutrality, driving our renewable energy sector at COP26 will release massive investment generating those choices. And the number of jobs created will dwarf the current coal mining workforce, which, as the Courier Mail in Brisbane pointed out only a few days ago, is actually smaller than the number of workers at Bunnings. Creating choices for all of those coal workers. But, fellow Australians, timing is critical. As other countries, and I've been to them, over 50, I got COVID in the process. This was not easy. We travelled all through the pandemic, but I can tell you with my own eyes, they have similar natural advantages to Australia, but they are not dithering. Both personally and through FFI, from what I've seen, I am convinced that Australia has a magnificent future, and I'm backing it into renewable energy. I'm backing the careers, I'm backing the jobs of my fellow Australians. I'm putting billions of dollars on the line in the regions, and only just this week I made those declarations. So please, judge what a person does occasionally, but trust what judge what a person says occasionally, but trust what they do. The iron ore company, a huge heavy industry, heavy manufacturing, heavy carbon emitting company I founded, committed to net zero not by 2050, but by 2030. That's why, years ago, we decided to turn Fortescue into a major green energy and green industry giant, a business that can create the technology and the jobs and the careers and decarbonise heavy industry, starting at home with us, spreading out across Australia, and then industry worldwide. We heavy emitting manufacturing sector globally, we're that huge piece of the emission reductions puzzle you don't hear that much about. We call this new company Fortescue Future Industries, and I've never been more committed to any other professional endeavour nor greater challenge in my own life. It was at the time a totally radical idea, but as my family and friends will tell you, anticipating and relishing challenges is, I suppose, a little in my character. And climate change is our own, every Australian's, collective greatest challenge. The fossil fuel industry has created the idea that fixing climate change is a personal responsibility. This kind of follows the lie of the plastics industry that you throwing plastic away is your problem. Them giving you no choice but to consume in plastic doesn't even get mentioned. Some politicians and the fossil fuel sector would like you also to have no choice. Just consume the fossil fuel from fossil fuel. Pooh. I say that's not good enough. I want to give you that choice, a dirty fuel or a clean fuel, and just as economically competitive. The elephant in the room is the heavy emitters. We have to act. Mums and dads who are forced to consume fossil fuel, mums and dads, I know you're being forced to consume fossil fuel because we have nothing else, but you're not responsible for global warming. It's the oil and gas companies who gave us no choice and the politicians who followed them. So let's look at my industry. It isn't pretty. Heavy industry accounts for over a quarter of all our global emissions. The Scope 3 emissions of the top 4 iron ore companies, what the customers of Fortescue, BHP, Vale and Rio Tinto emit, are equivalent to Russia's entire national emissions. That's because our steel mill clients use coal to turn the iron ore into steel. It's coal that's the problem. But we, the iron ore producers, must take the rap until we give them a choice too. Demand for steel will continue to rise, and the people who buy steel will increasingly, I hope, require that it's green and zero emissions. Steel makers, in turn, will feel the squeeze and will put pressure on iron ore companies such as my own to produce green iron ore. I love that, and it's just the beginning of the pressure. The solution lies in green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is an energy carrier, but unlike fossil fuels, it's becoming cheaper, and it will never run out. And of course, we won't cook the planet. It's also a gas, which means it's compatible with our way of life. Highway fuel stations with the same looking Bowsers. But cars that are quicker to fill up. Cars that look exactly like our old ones, but generate hardly any noise, and of course, no exhaust. And to make green hydrogen, you simply split water, any old water. It can be wastewater, desalinated water, seawater, into hydrogen and oxygen using renewable electricity only. It's like a miracle molecule, the Swiss Army knife of energy and green products, versatile and able to decarbonise even the most challenging sectors like, say, iron ore, cement, steel, iron, fertilisers, aeroplanes, trucks, trains, cars. There's no end to the miracle molecule solution. Let's get after it. Even if you have a gas pipeline, you just chuck the hydrogen into the pipeline. If you want to get it overseas today, you can turn it into ammonia. Look outside your window. There are ammonia trucks going up and down the highway and ammonia ships going up and down our coast. It's a routine and established industry. And like we truck liquid hydrogen all over the place, it won't be long before we can ship that too. And let me remind you, it was only a few decades ago that people said shipping LNG was impossible. But right now, it's one of the most shipped commodities in the world, and we are planning for green hydrogen to be the most shipped commodity in the world. Yeah, you probably all heard about the energy crisis in Europe, and some are trying to blame green energy and like, but can I tell you, Russia's turning off the spigot. And that extortionate gas price is predictable when that happens. If Europe had green hydrogen made down the road, it wouldn't be a problem because green hydrogen can be made everywhere, and it's like a battery. It stores renewable energy, solving the issue of intermittency, and like we do with oil and gas, we can store it. This is particularly relevant to us, all Australians, given that 65% of all East Coast coal-fired power will disappear by 2035. Actually, not long away. The main constraint is the price of electrolyzers and renewable energy, and we all know both are falling. The electrolyzers we will make in Australia, starting in Gladstone, will cost a fraction of what they do in Europe. We have the technology to achieve this. That's why business people and industrialists around the world are moving. The chair of Hyundai Motor Group, a visionary called Usan Shung, who we are fiercely aligned with, recently announced that all vehicles of Hyundai will have hydrogen fuel cells, not by 2040, not by 2030, but by 2028, this decade. Another business leader I respect, Mukesh Ambani, Asia's richest bloke, is operating under a 1 + 1 + 1 principle. $1 for 1 kilogram of green hydrogen in 1 decade. Both leaders are global industry heavyweights. Both believe that green hydrogen is going to be, like I do, the world's future energy source. So it does kind of amaze me that a shrinking minority, thankfully of politicians increasingly isolated, with no experience and even less knowledge, argue the toss with businesses that have been the most successful in scaling up capacity and scaling down costs in the world. But as I always say, don't trust what a person says necessarily, trust what they do. So for Fortescue Future Industries, or FFI, securing 300 gigawatts of renewable resources in Africa, Asia, Central Asia, Europe, Latin America, New Zealand, and growing quickly here in Australia, over 4 to 5 times our current national capacity, is what I hope you would expect from us. And in our home country, we're taking the Green Energy Manufacturing Centre at Gladstone and replicating it across Australia at sites all over our country, creating the foundation for new industries in green ammonia, green iron, green steel, green fertilisers and green cement, with thousands of jobs at each location, having manufacturing coming roaring back to our country. In Perth, I also have a team who recently built the world's first hydrogen fuel cell haul truck. You see these old diesel-driven haul trucks at mine sites all over the world, but ours is powered by hydrogen. We also built a green-powered drill rig and a green ammonia-powered train and ship engine, and they did it all in 130 days. 130 days to start the next industrial revolution, to prove that we can do it, because we need no proof that the world needs it. And they did it. We're starting to manufacture our own hydrogen fuel cell drivetrains for our own trucks and making these drivetrains available to every truck supplier who wishes to pull their head out of the sand in the world. It's the future. This month, Fortescue also committed to net zero Scope 3 emissions by 2040. This Scope 3 target leads global industry. And we made it because we've done our homework. And now we're going hard after it. And this means that Fortescue must be carbon neutral to make this happen, even 10 years earlier, by 2030. Take, say, all 8 of our 330-metre long bulk carriers. Take our hundreds of trucks, our dozens of trains, our dozens of power stations. Everything must be running on green, renewable ammonia, hydrogen or green electricity by 2030, only a few years away. And it also means that by 2030, we need to have developed a method to help our customers make green steel. We will do this by producing, right here in Australia, once again, with green iron ore, and if the technology keeps going the way it looks, with even green iron. But definitely making the green hydrogen to refine their ore in their countries into green steel, all without that problem child that turned the seaborne iron ore industry into Russia for carbon, coal. Ladies and gentlemen, green hydrogen is the real solution. Not the fake hydrogen, not blue or grey, the real stuff, green. Every political leader I've spoken to this week, from Barnaby Joyce to Scott Morrison, has acknowledged that we need energy alternatives and we need them quickly. I must admit, even mudslinging, I may be wrong, Matt Canavan admits that all Australians, at least, he admits this, deserve a choice. There will never be a better time, with just 2 weeks before COP26, for all parties, Matt, Scott, Barnaby, everybody, the Labor Party, come on in, Greens, get with us, to show unity and give Australians the choices they want and that they deserve. And our Prime Minister, please, sir, be at COP26. We need our leadership to be selling Australia's massive green energy potential at COP26, not be a cop-out at home. Carbon neutrality by 2050 gives us all the choice now, rather than waiting till 2050 when we'll have no choice at all. If we don't make decisions now, policymakers in foreign countries will understandably make it for us. And the rules will not be on our own terms because we weren't even in the game in the first place. It's reasonable, it's not a conspiracy, they're just acting logically. So I say to our country's leaders, you have two choices. Do nothing as global warming sets in, desertify our country, or allow local entrepreneurs, homegrown institutions and multinationals made here to invest in our country going green instead of being forced to follow that economic opportunity overseas because it wasn't here in Australia. So let me give the last word, you might say ironically, in his words, to the leader of the National Party. I caught up with him for a casual beer or two, 3, in Tamworth this week, but Barney got pretty serious over breakfast the following day. It's the economic argument that I'm listening to, Twiggy, he said. I might be a cynic about the capacity to fix global warming, but I'm a believer in economic opportunities presented by it. And I see how it can add to Australia's economic position, and I can see how it grows our regions. I'll be fine if you want to quote that, Twiggy. Spot on, Barney. Thanks for the quote, mate. Australia, let's crack on, let's get on with it. Thank you.